Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. This past month saw multiple events that could make food more expensive or a little harder to find in the short term. They're a mix of global and local situations, and many of them probably won't stabilize anytime soon. Then on top of that, the end of summer means that severe weather will get worse in many parts of the country. Coastal areas will have hurricanes to worry about, while fall and winter won't be too far behind for everybody else. And as we all know, natural disasters have been getting more frequent and more dangerous, and having a healthy stockpile of food is one of the most important things to have to help you get through the aftermath of one of those events. So today we're going to talk about the food items that every prepper should stockpile before September 2025. I'll also go over the reasons behind each one so you know why acting now is so important. First up, we have canned meats, things like tuna, salmon, chicken, turkey, and beef. They're not as fancy as something like a fresh steak, but they are a vital part of your prepper pantry. And one reason to make them a priority this month is that production in some parts of the meat industry have taken a significant hit. A large processing facility has been running well below normal output after ice raids earlier this summer. It's already made it harder for some distributors and retailers to get consistent deliveries. And if you've been shopping lately, you may have noticed at least a few empty spots on the shelves. Then the other issue affecting canned meats is their price. Metal tariffs that went into effect this summer are increasing how much it costs to make the cans themselves. Industry groups have warned that we could see noticeable price increases on canned foods across the board within the next couple of months. And since several major retailers have already said they'll be adjusting prices to cover those costs, there's a good chance that we're going to be paying more for these products before fall gets here. But from a preparedness standpoint, canned meats are hard to beat. Most of them have a shelf life of at least 2 to 5 years, and in many cases they'll last longer if you store them the right way. Canned foods can technically be safe to eat indefinitely. They're high in protein and calories, which is exactly what you need in a survival situation, and they're also versatile. You can eat them straight out of the can if you don't have a way to cook, or you can mix them with pasta, beans, rice, or soups for a heartier meal. They're also the most cost-effective and reliable way to store meat long term. They're less expensive than freeze-dried versions, which are cost a ton, and they don't rely on a steady stream of electricity like meat stored in a freezer does. And if you're adding canned meats to your stockpile, my advice is to get variety. Canned fish like tuna and salmon are lightweight and packed with healthy fats, while poultry options like chicken and turkey are a little milder and mix well into recipes. The bottom line is that canned meats give you a dependable protein source and a long storage life. So if you got space on your shelves, now's the time to fill it. Next up, we have canned vegetables and soups, and those are important for several reasons. They're a great way to get quick nutrition, vitamins, and meal variety when fresh produce isn't available. Then they also have a long shelf life and are easy to prepare. Unfortunately, though, the canned vegetable industry is facing some pretty significant challenges right now. Del Monte Foods, one of the oldest and most iconic producers of canned fruits and vegetables in the U.S., filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last month. Even though they secured funding to keep operating through a sale or restructuring, the move reflects rising input costs, especially recent tariff hikes on steel and aluminum, and also shrinking demand for canned goods as consumers increasingly favor fresh produce or private label alternatives. So what does that mean for us? First, it means that production uncertainty is growing, with Del Monte in financial restructuring and major facilities closing or downsizing. Supply chains are at risk of bottlenecks, meaning fewer cans hitting the grocery shelves. Then, like we discussed earlier, packaging costs are rising. Steel tariffs are pushing can makers to raise prices, and vegetable producers are expected to pass that on to us. That impacts basic soups, beans, diced tomatoes, peas, and mixed vegetables. But demand for canned goods could also rebound unexpectedly. Economic stress leads to budget-conscious shoppers going back to canned foods, which often outrank fresh options when money's tight. That potential jump in demand would heighten the risk of spot shortages, at least in the short term. And with all this going on, I'd recommend doing a few different things. First, stock a variety of canned vegetables. Focus on those that have the highest nutritional values. And to help with that, I came up with the canned goods nutrition list. It has the most important information for the fruits, vegetables, and soups that people tend to stockpile, because there's no sense in buying a ton of food that either has no calories or has so much salt and sugar that it's unhealthy to eat. The nutrition list is free for anyone who signs up for my emails, and you can do that using the link in the description below. Then once you know which varieties you're going to buy them in bulk. Doing that will help you get the best prices and will allow you to stockpile a significant amount of food very quickly. Then once you have a decent amount of canned goods, rotate them regularly. They should be the foods that you already eat, so using your oldest cans first really shouldn't be all that difficult. After that, we have dried beans and lentils. These are simple staples that pack serious nutrition, storage longevity, and affordability, and they're essential for any prepper pantry. When it comes to storage, they can last for 20 years or more when stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. They're packed with protein, fiber, iron, and carbs, which provide fuel for your body and can help morale. Then when you mix them with rice or canned vegetables, you'll have hearty, nutrient-dense meals. One big reason to stock up on them right now, though, is what's happening in U.S. growing regions. According to the U.S. Drought Monitor, around 30% of the lower 48 is currently experiencing drought conditions, and some of those areas are key dry bean growing states, like Nebraska. Farmers in those regions have reported early signs of moisture stress in bean fields, especially where irrigation is limited. In some places, the lack of consistent rain is also affecting lentils and other pulse crops, raising concerns about how well pods will fill and mature as summer heat continues. This means that domestic production is at risk. Even moderate yield losses could tighten the U.S. market for dry beans, particularly if storage from last year isn't enough to cover any shortfalls. Then there could be price changes later in the year. They may remain steady until harvest, but if drought-related yield cuts are confirmed, price hikes could happen in late 2025 and early 2026. And if domestic supply is lower than usual, the U.S. may have to lean more heavily on imports, which brings its own set of price and availability challenges. But there are ways you can get around all this. First, buy a mix of black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans, chickpeas, and lentils. Having variety will give you flexibility in recipes and nutrition. Then use long-term storage techniques. Pack them into Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers and then store those inside of sealed containers. That'll increase their shelf life and make it harder for pests to contaminate your food. Also, keep an eye on the news, paying close attention to events like exporters withholding beans or delaying shipments. Next up, we have white rice, which has been a go-to prepper staple for decades. When stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, it'll last for 20 years or more. It's also pretty versatile. You can pair it with beans, canned meats, vegetables, and soups, or use it to make fried rice or porridges. It's also relatively cheap. While pretty much everything is more expensive than it used to be, buying white rice is still one of the best ways to get a ton of food for not a whole lot of money. Where I live, I can still get like a 20-pound bag for under $12. And while prices for white rice probably won't go into the stratosphere, they may go up at least some in the coming months. Environmental factors like heavy spring rains in rice-growing regions of the U.S. have likely reduced long grain output, which means less rice will be available when harvest hits the market. And of course, less availability usually means higher prices. So even though we probably won't be facing like a nationwide rice shortage or anything crazy, it's always a good thing to have. And if you can get some more now to protect yourself from price increases later on, then go for it. Then after you buy your rice, be sure you move it over to Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers and place those inside of buckets for extra protection from accidental punctures, because those do happen, and then also some pests. Like with other foods, rotate your stocks occasionally to ensure you and your family have a fresh supply, and that also helps you spot check your supplies to make sure that something hasn't been compromised. Then it's also a good idea to stock up on other dry goods like pasta and whole grains like oats, barley, quinoa, and wheat berries. Foods like those aren't just pantry fillers. They're nutrient-rich, have long shelf lives, and are vital ingredients in things that we eat every day. For example, wheat berries can be ground into flour and then used for bread, other baked goods, and also fried foods. Prices for dry pasta specifically have been pretty high for a while now. 2023 was the peak, and while they've gone down since then, they're still significantly higher than they were before, and with inflation and all the other factors we have going on right now, the chances of prices going back down are pretty low. So now's as good of a time as any to grab a mix of dried foods. Get different kinds of spaghetti, elbows, oats, wheat berries, barley, and quinoa. Doing that will help you have a balanced diet and also flexibility when cooking meals. If you have family members with gluten sensitivities, be sure to stockpile gluten-free versions of dried pasta along with gluten-free oats and quinoa. Also keep an eye on local price trends. It's possible for one area to experience price fluctuations while other areas remain relatively stable. Next up is freeze-dried eggs, and I'm not talking about powdered egg mix. I'm talking about eggs that are specifically packaged for long-term storage. Like other freeze-dried foods, freeze-dried eggs have a very long shelf life. When kept sealed in their original packaging, they can last 10, 20 years or more, and they also rehydrate quickly, so they're a quick and easy way to get a solid source of nutrition that may be difficult to get otherwise, especially if you can't keep chickens. But a recent market analysis shows that the U.S. dried egg market is facing tightening supplies in mid-2025. Even though costs have eased as bird flu outbreaks slow down, most processors are producing only enough freeze-dried eggs to meet existing orders, leaving very little surplus inventory on hand. That limited supply paired with historically tight egg reserves means bulk freeze-dried egg availability is shrinking, even as overall egg prices drop. This means that any surge in demand, whether from stores, food banks, or other buyers, could quickly clear out any available freeze-dried eggs. Then while raw egg prices have dipped, finished freeze-dried products are still priced high because of processing constraints and minimal surplus. If demand increases or production drops, prices could go up. And finally, even if bird flu does ease up, rebuilding egg supplies takes time, meaning freeze-dried stocks aren't likely to recover quickly. So buy what you can. Even if prices are high, scarcity risk makes it worth it. And when you're buying, choose reputable brands. Look for sealed cans with a 25-year shelf life. Then if you already have a supply of freeze-dried eggs, rotate through them occasionally. You can add a little bit of them to scrambled eggs or breakfast dishes so that everyone in your family gets used to their taste and texture, because it is a little different, and also ensure that you don't end up wasting your old stock. And finally, monitor news and sales. If you hear about new retailer shipments or flash sales, that's your chance to get more before demand outpaces supply. Next up, we have honey, which is a superfood and one of the most valuable foods you could stockpile. If you get the right kind, it can literally last forever, and it's a good source of quick energy that's a lot better for you than other sweeteners like white sugar. Honey can even be used as an antiseptic if you don't have other medications, since the same properties that give it a really long shelf life also allow it to kill germs on cuts and scrapes. Unfortunately, though, the bees that produce our honey are under a lot of pressure. Ongoing reports warn that U.S. beekeepers could lose up to 60 to 70% of their honeybee colonies in 2025, which is the highest recorded losses in history. According to studies and beekeeper surveys released in late spring, varroa mite resistance and viral outbreaks are decimating hives nationwide. That's on top of the fact that U.S. honey production fell about 4% in 2024. All this means that supplies of honey are shrinking. Massive hive losses strain domestic production, and rebuilding colonies takes time. So even if imports fill some gaps, total U.S. honey availability will be under pressure. With production down and demand steady or increasing, we could see honey prices climb in late 2025, and since this has been going on for a while now, we have less of a surplus buffer than what we'd like to. So if at all possible, add some more honey to your pantry. Have a mix of small jars for quick access and larger ones for longer term stock. When buying honey, choose raw and unfiltered versions, since pasteurized honey loses a lot of its beneficial enzymes and flavor. Also check local sources. Many regional producers sell directly online or via co-ops and farmer markets. Doing that will support local beekeepers and help hedge against import problems. My family and I have learned the value of shopping local back in the spring of 2020. While larger grocery chains were having trouble getting reliable shipments of meat, our local butcher almost always had something available. Even though they might not have had the exact variety we wanted, we could still usually get something pretty close. And remember, if you have a jar of honey that crystallizes, usually all you need to do is gently warm it back up. It should melt again and still be usable because, once again, honey never actually expires. Now, if you want to see a full list of canned goods that every prepper should stockpile, then click here. Or if you want to see survival foods that never expire, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.